Unban list 2024.
Next on Eternal Turtles. Hey, I just want to give a quick shout out to all of our Patreon supporters out there. Thank you to the Dirtle Maniacs. If you want to be a Dirtle Maniac, go to patreon.com/eternaldurtles and help support the channel. It keeps things going. It keeps things updated. Thanks so much for watching. On with the show. Hello and welcome to Eternal Turtles. I'm your host, Zach Clark, and with me as always, Phil Blackman. Phil, how's it going, man?
Zach, you're insane. You're insane.
Why am I insane?
I thought some of my choices, I thought some of my recommendations here were, you know, I was going to have to really go to bat for them. But
Informed,
now
yeah.
I'm just like, whatever, because your stuff is like, you can't defend this.
I think where I'm coming from with my choices, and we'll post a list and everything, but you're going to get to see all of them. I think where I'm coming from with my choices here are that the format, it doesn't matter. There's no philosophy to the format, so things can use a shake-up anyhow. And a lot of these cards are only on the list because either one, the first caveat I always say about these, we're not taking financial considerations into consideration at all for these. So if something's on the reserve list and I want to unban, I put it on the list because that's just how I feel. But beyond that, some of the stuff I just look at and I'm like, it doesn't belong on the ban list. And there's no reason it's on there aside from just like no one's given this enough time to look at, which, hey, they just laid off 4,000 people or whatever. So yeah, probably they don't have enough time to, give a good curation to the ban list for Legacy, one of their least popular formats. So to that end, let's start it off with my very first pick on here. And we're only going to talk about the cards that we changed our mind on or went off the ban list from last year. And you can find last year's video somewhere. I'm sure I'll post it at the end or in the show notes or something. But
also, just straight up put a straight up screenshot of this list that we're looking at right now in between us. Like,
yeah, here it is.
Here it is. Here's our picks. We're going to talk about them.
Yeah. So the first one we're going to talk about is Arkham's Astrolabe. I think, and I did not think this last year, but I think that this card should be removed from the ban list.
You just don't remember what it was like when this card was around.
I do remember what it was like.
You don't remember.
I played that deck. Like, I played decks with this card. To me, the only reason this card's on the ban list is because, God forbid, we give mana fixing to people that don't have the budget to buy dual lands. That's how I read this card. I'm coming at this from like the National Democratic Caucus. Hillary over Bernie Sanders. That's how they're playing this. They just want the rich people to own and play all the best decks in the format, and this is a perfect example of this scenario. If anything, they should reprint this card without the that just says basic on it. You have to fetch a basic.
Play Prophetic Prism, dude.
No, you can't play Prophetic Prism. It costs too much.
Oh, it costs too much? Why? I wonder why. Why do you think it costs too much?
Because it doesn't cost 1 mana.
Oh, so what is keeping that from being playable in the format?
It costs too much.
What's 2 mana? We're up the beanstalk gamers. What pray tell is keeping 2 mana off of your ability to think that it's playable?
Because because when you need to be casting your 2-drops off of this Arkham's Astrolabe, it's too late.
Zach, I'm playing up the beanstalk. It's a 2 mana. It doesn't do anything other than draw a card when it immediately comes in. Prophetic Prism the same way. What's the problem?
Then why not unban this then? If you think Prophetic Prism is a card that is good enough, then why not unban this?
I'm not saying Prophetic Prism is good enough. I'm saying you're saying you can't you can't play this effect because that everybody's trying to keep out people who don't own dual lands.
Yeah, it costs
Prophetic Prism is right there
to put into play.
It sure does.
That's a no-brainer. Like, it literally costs double the mana. I
want you to think about how many 1 mana artifacts. How many 1 mana? Actually, I take it back. Let's broaden it. How many 1 mana effects on 1 mana spells, permanents? ETB draw a card. It goes. You play it. It's 1 mana. It ETBs. It draws a card. That's the text. It's an artifact. All it is, Ichor Wellspring for 1 mana. Zach, how many of those exist?
No, I don't know. How many? Do any exist?
Close to zero, probably
Close to zero.
because if it did,
Sure.
you know what would happen? It would be all over Legacy.
Sure.
Do you know how powerful a permanent ET being, like a 1-mana permanent ET being with any amount of anything that does anything? You want to know why Arcum's Astrolabe is bad? And it's not banned just because it soft bans the basics you want to play with. You already can't really play with that many basics anyway because of how fast the format is. So, like, barring that, Arcum's Astrolabe's problem is that it nullifies the entirety of the color pie. Do you remember when five color decks, right?
What does the color pie matter in this format where the color pie doesn't matter anyhow?
Oh my God, our Blood Moon Wasteland gamers over here, bro! If you played,
perfect example. What this card removes all of those decks from the format, which to me are trash decks anyhow. I'm sick of seeing stompy decks that play Blood Moon as a crutch. Like, if you're a real deck, make a real deck. Don't just throw 4 Blood Moons and 4 Magus of the Moons into your deck. That's BS as far as I'm concerned.
You're showing me that you're the type of person that's like, oh, I have an ailment. What I need to do is get another ailment to make it so that I don't feel the previous ailment. You're like, you know what's really toxic? Blood Moon and Wasteland. You know what we should do to fix that? This other really toxic card instead of getting rid of the toxic things in the first place.
Can I go full MC Escher real fast and put a hot take inside of a hot take?
Sure.
The reason why this card was banned is because people were sick of seeing snow-covered basic lands, and they didn't get to see the basic lands they love and hold dear in the format. And if this card had a mana value that was like you could only use it on basics instead of snow-covered lands, it would be unbanned.
I think it wouldn't. I think you're remembering.
Never have been banned, I should say.
You are distinctly forgetting the play patterns of what this card generated. You remember the decks that it was in? It was in like 14 color Snowco, dude. You want to know what is one of the top decks right now?
Thank you, Snowco. Oko made this a good card because it turned into a 3/3. We don't have Oko. We should have this card back.
Yeah, I'm sure that the 4 and 5 color decks would love to have just an impenetrable mana base of unwastable cards that you can also just make 5. Every land is a rainbow land that can't be wastelanded. Like,
to that end, I do want to say, if in all fairness, if we go to a 5 color mana base with this card, it's going to make Leyline Binding less castable because you're not going to have to lean so far into having all 5 colors out.
You know, I think there is something like there's some amount of tension with it, like the fact that I think that it was pushed to the level that it turned any land into a rainbow land as opposed to gating it in some other way. Like, it's not like it was one tap, add any color. You know, it was just tap. It just turned your land into rainbow lands. And so you effectively, off your basic island or your basic whatever, you were holding up Pyroblast, Flusterstorm, Veil of Summer. Like, you could not play around anything because you had to assume your opponent had everything until they showed something to you in game 1 or whatever. So, like, granted, Oko did make it also a 3/3, and it also made, like, Ice Fang Coatl and shit like that, like, actual playable cards. But I don't, as toxic and terrible as I think fetch lands are, I think it's worse if you are also, if we have to deal with Wasteland, right? If everybody's like, Wasteland's like Force of Will, it's a check on the format. Like, you have to have it. You can't ever envision a world without it. Well, then you can't have something like this that then removes that check and then maintain the check. Because then you either have to be playing that check or you have to be playing Arcum's Astrolabe.
So you've seen through the hole in my whole plot. You've lifted the curtain on the great and powerful Oz here. I want this card unbanned so that I can start playing 8-cast again. Because people won't be able to play Wasteland, and thusly 8-cast will be much better.
The one thing that I want to just caveat here throughout this entire list that we're going to run through is that a lot of it is based on, like, what we talked about in last episode about, like, the stresses that the format is being applied with right now. And one thing that is appealing about Arcum's Astrolabe, where when you said yes, the first thing that came to mind is I was like, oh, maybe that's interesting because it can't be tutored off of Urza Saga. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like, there's maybe a space to, like, play in where Urza Saga isn't just this thing that's, you know, making every other thing that would be reasonably playable just actually busted because you have it, you know, you have as many copies as you want attached to a Grave Titan. Mm-hmm. Like, that's where my head initially went. But then I went back and remembered the play patterns of Arcum's Astrolabe, and I was like, it's actually, like, I think that if there was a subtle adjustment made to Arkham's Astrolabe, if it didn't draw the card, if it did something else instead, whether that's scry or whatever, if there was, if it was maybe castable off of like a particular kind of snow mana as opposed to colorless snow mana, like if it was like you can only cast it off your snow colored forest, and now we're actually mana fixing, and it's like, okay, well, if I don't have an Arkham's Astrolabe on turn 1, and I'm putting a basic forest in my deck, is that punishing? Like, there's a little bit more space where, like, if they just dialed another knob on it, like maybe. I think as it stands, I would not unban it. I think like making it so that you're giving the blue soup decks that are already playing all of the colors anyway, because they're just everything is power crept to the point where you have to. I don't think that it would promote anything healthy or fun or interesting beyond like, yeah, you can have your Emery and Goblin Engineer loops.
Yeah. All right. So a no for you on Arkham's Astrolabe.
Yeah.
That stays the same. I changed my mind from last year on Arkham's Astrolabe to a yes. Let's go to the next card, a card that I changed my mind on, and I think a lot of people are going to be surprised that I changed my mind on this. Deathright Shaman. We both have this as a yes.
Yeah, I would. Deathright Shaman is not a card that I'm like, oh, it's very obviously easily unbannable. I think it's one of the cards that I want to see within the pressures of the format now. I think at the time, like, all the cards that it may have checked were too busted, like Treasure Cruise and all that stuff. It was too good. I think the format is a bit different now. Like, if you think about like the threats that we were playing alongside Deathright Shaman, it was Young Pyromancer. Yeah. Like, at the time, that was the hotness, was also playing it alongside Young Pyromancer. I get you had Git Probe and Cabal Therapy as like an incentive for that, but like the best 2-drop you had access to at the time in the decks that were playing Deathright Shaman was Young Pyromancer. Now, it was also played in Elves, it was played in Maverick Abzan style decks, but like those decks, like Abzan and all that, it can have some help anyway. Whatever. Cradle Control is like, a tier 2, 2.5 deck. It's fine. It's definitely playable. Top 8 at EW. Like, you can certainly do it. The fact that it's a 1/2, so your Bowmaster doesn't just check every single mana dork out of the format that isn't Delighted Halfling, which in my mind, Delighted Halfling is just incentivizing snowballing, uninteractive, whatever. Because if you play a Delighted Halfling, you're not trying to do anything that's interactive with the opponent. You're trying to do the thing that's like, I'm just going to do something, and it doesn't matter what you do, right? And I think, if anything, I think Delighted Halfling, even though not as powerful as Deathright Shaman, is actually the worst design. So,
I agree. The design is less. It's less fun, and it's also like slightly not as good. But it leads to relatively shitty play patterns.
I think that Deathright Shaman, within the confines that we have now of like how much more powerful the format has gotten since it was banned, like it was banned in what, 2018?
Let's go with 2018.
I think it was banned in 2018 because it survived top.
Yeah.
Because Probe, it was banned at the same time as Probe, okay. And I think that Deathright Shaman, never lived in the fire design era. And I'd be interested to see what it would look like given the way the format looks now. Like, you can go turn 1 Deathright, turn 2, like if you're on the play and you go, okay, turn 1 Urza Saga, go. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, all right, I'll play this Deathright Shaman. And you're like, all right, I'll play an Ancient Tomb and pass the turn.
How this would have not survived. Like, let's say it survived up until Oko. They would have banned this instead of Oko.
It's just like
the
other cards
still be dealing with Oko.
Like, if you compare like where the other cards that are like the powerful 1-drop plays, it's like, is Deathright Shaman more powerful than Dragon Rage Channeler?
Yeah, no, it's a perfect example.
Like, is Deathright Shaman more powerful than Ragavan? Or Ragavan?
No, I'm gonna say emphatically, absolutely not.
I mean, like, there's definitely debates because like they incentivize different types of play, but like, if Dragon Rage Channeler is the bar and we're willing to do that, like, Deathright Shaman doesn't draw you cards. It's disruptive and it's a mana dork. It's a Birds of Paradise, like, assuming that there's something in the yard, but it's not guaranteed that you have access to all of the things that you want at all the time. Like, I thought that, like, if we both have Deathright Shamans on the table, like, that dance of like that game of chicken is more interesting than if we both have Deathright Shamans and are just turboing through our deck every turn.
It's interesting you mentioned that, Phil, because I think the advent of Deathright Shaman as a card that people wanted to play actually came after after the Energy Field, Helm of Obedience, Rest in Peace version of Miracles kind of just went away forever, right? Because that card was unplayable when one of the most popular decks in the format, which it was at the time, stopped playing the card that just made you have a Squire, you know?
Yeah, I mean, the only other 1-drop that's played in the format right now at like a legitimate level that doesn't do something effectively when it ETBs or when it like the turn it enters the table, like you can argue Dragon Rage Channeler doesn't, but like Dragon Rage Channeler Bauble is like one of the most common plays. Like it's getting some amount of value. Like it's a 3/3 most of the time, very early on, and then it is evasive and you don't interact with it. Like Deathright Shaman at no point draws you a card. At no point does it like. I mean, I get that it's doing different things, but like I think the power level of Deathright Shaman is just embodied in our minds because we contextualize it at the time when it was the most busted thing. Like the other deck that it was really powerful in was actual factual elves, and that deck is gone.
Gone.
It's gone.
Goodbye.
It doesn't exist. Your Glimpse of Nature, Glimpse of Nature, right? I'm forgetting the card's name because it hasn't seen us play. Glimpse of Nature. Your Glimpse of Nature elves gone. Doesn't exist. Right, and if any player that is playing Glimpse of Nature Elves is the equivalent to that deck, like I am to Miracles. Yeah. It's dead, and you're the only player doing it.
Old man yelling at clouds.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, like, if anything, I think of all of the cards on the list, like, is Deathright Shaman very good? Yes, but it was also at a time when all of the other cards were way worse.
Yeah,
way worse.
I would call this a very uncontroversial take as far as like what as far as the unbanning of this card is concerned. I do want to say this, and we can move on to the next card. You convinced me last week that this card probably doesn't belong on the ban list anymore. So of course, watch next week if you or last week if you haven't. Last week's cast. But my final like thought on this card, the reason why I like twisted myself to saying like, fine, whatever, you can have it back, is because there is no philosophy for this format. So removing this card because of ubiquity or whatever, like, it doesn't make any sense to me anymore. It's the same. That's also why I was like, okay, well, if we can have this, then we can have Arkham's Astrolabe. Like, one to me is the same as the other in that regard. But it's the fact that like this was removed from Modern because of just there was too much of it, right? Which is weird because Modern didn't have there's too much of this like philosophy. They were just like, we just can't have it, the win rate's too high, which is fine. But this was removed because everyone was just crying about it, me included. I probably still would cry about it to this day because I don't like the card. I think the design is terrible. I would love to see it back in Modern. I might play Modern again, but I removed it from my hate list because I was like, there's no philosophy here, so who cares if this gets unbanned? We can have any one drop we want.
Yeah, I'll wrap up with the Deathright Shaman thing by saying I think Deathright Shaman was a fire designed card before fire design existed. I think if it were printed now, we'd be like, wow, this is really powerful. It's really good, but like there's choices to be made. Yeah. The dance is interesting. The disruption is meaningful. Like, yes, you burn them out of combat, but like it's really like, just look at Deathright Shaman. Like, if Dragon Rage Channeler was printed back then instead of Deathright Shaman, and it was banned the same way that Deathright Shaman was around, and then Deathright Shaman was printed in Modern Horizons 2, and that's what we were playing with now, and we were looking back at Dragon Rage Channeler, wouldn't we be looking at Dragon Rage Channeler the exact same way and be like, that card was insane? Like, Surveil every time you cast a non-creature spell, and then it becomes a better Delver? That's insane. Yeah. Right? We would be saying the exact same. In my mind, I think that we would be talking about it very differently. I think it's a victim of its era in that it was ahead of its time because it's way more powerful than anything back then. And nowadays, it would just be one of the many broken 1-drops we have access to.
Phil, Eternal Dirtles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield. Moxfield is the best Magic the Gathering deck building website on the internet. You can create, share, and find decks from Commander to Legacy, and even fan-supported formats like Pre-Modern and Old School. You can see all of our decks on our Moxfield. Follow the links below to stay tuned. Phil, that's a great segue into our next card, a victim of its era, because I'm choosing, and you did not choose, and this is a thing I changed my mind on as well, I'm choosing Dig Through Time to come back. I think it's time to allow Dig Through Time back in the format the decks that it was great in, Miracles played it for sure. But the decks that it really excelled in were like Sneak and Show. And that deck is all but dead now. I haven't seen a Sneak and Show deck in years. So if the big thrill for playing Dig Through Time is to bring back a deck archetype that barely exists now, I'm cool with that.
Yeah, I could see an argument for Dig Through Time. My issue is that, like, I think that anything that incentivized, like, if Dig Through Time wasn't just straight delve, like, if it was look at the top cards equivalent to the non-land cards you exiled, my real thing with Dig Through Time is that, like, you know, subsidizing fetch lands even further is really where I'm just like, there's just no way. Like,
here's a question, Phil. If in a world where Murktide Region exists and Dig Through Time exists, do you think Dig Through Time even sees play?
I would like to see, like, I think there would be interesting, like, when they printed...
There's a choice to be made, at least, right?
There's a choice to be made. We talked about it last week, and I'm not discounting that because I do agree with that notion. I think there's something, if they printed a Dig Through Time that wasn't just, hey, your fetch lands are also soul lands, you know? Like, when they printed, I think it's called Farsight Ritual out of...
Yeah. We'll go with Farsight Ritual.
A Farsight Ritual, it's like if you bargain it, you get to Dig Through Time. But it costs 4 mana, and it always costs 4. Mm-hmm. And I was like, if they had printed that, and if you bargained it, it costs 2 less, like, you know, maybe there's something, like, would that have seen... would that see a ton of play or not? I'm not sure. If they just printed Dig Through Time as it stood, and it said, look at the top X cards, X is equivalent to the number of non-land cards you delved, like, okay, maybe then we're a little bit more interesting, because now your fetch lands aren't also just, you know, converting a card off the top later on. I think that's really my issue with it, is that fetch lands are broken, and we're not going to get rid of fetch lands anytime soon. So it's like if Dig Through Time came back, would I enjoy, like, seeing the parallel of, like, which option do you go with? Do you go with the overpowered threat, or do you go with the card selection? Like, obviously this would power up the combo decks, or I mean some of the combo decks. Would it be interesting? Sure, I think so. And then, you know, you can see if it actually balances out or if there's action to take. But what I really would like to see is just like an updated Dig Through Time that just doesn't include the fetch lands being broken. And we're seeing them think about that to some extent. Like, they still do things where they incentivize and subsidize the fetch lands further. Like, they just printed or spoiled the new dual land set, which is ETB tapped, but that has the basic land types. And then it's ETB tapped, but when it ETBs, you surveil one. So you can effectively fetch in your end step to surveil to, like, set up a draw. And so in that regard, they clearly acknowledged, and, you know, Mark Rosewater and Mike Turian in the spoiler video for day 1 of previews said that you can get it with your fetch lands. They acknowledge that you can do this with fetch lands. They're aware they're doing it for fetch land interactions, but they're also aware of fetch land interactions because the new collect evidence mechanic coming out of the new upcoming Murders at Karlov Manor is explicitly not allowing fetch lands to be used to boost that mechanic. So collect evidence, the mechanic is it's collect evidence number. So let's say it's collect evidence 6. Mm-hmm. And then collect evidence means that you can exile any number of cards from your graveyard. And if its mana value is equivalent or greater than whatever that number is, you get the upgraded effect. Sure. Now, you can remove any number of cards. So if you just want to clear your graveyard, you can do that. But you're removing a fetch land for your collect bargain or your collect evidence cost will be 0. So it doesn't help you collect evidence. And in that regard, that's a workaround of this is like Delve. You're delving cards out of your yard, but your fetch lands do not help with that.
Yeah.
And if they're working in that space, I would love to see, like, Dig Through Time collect evidence 8 or Dig Through Time collect evidence 7 or whatever that number actually looks like, right?
Yeah.
I mean, for Dig Through Time, it was 6. So if let's say it was 6 blue, and it was like this card costs less for every
all the evidence
for the mana value that you collected, right? Yeah. Like, if equivalent to collect evidence X. This card costs X less to cast for the amount of evidence you collected. And now that's really interesting because fetch lands don't boost it. And in that's where I want to see a card like Dig Through Time remade.
I think that would be interesting. So, well, with that said, I think we've gnawed all the meat off of the Dig Through Time bone. Yeah. Phil, I learned today a really great idiom. One of the guys that I was working with, one of the experts that I was working with today, is French, and I have to assume this is like a French idiom. So a lot of times he was like, you know, instead of saying like here's the big reveal, he's like, so when you open the kimono, which is just a wild like concept. It's just like, it's a real weird visual. It's like, open the kimono, you know. Anyhow, to open the kimono on the whole drawing 2 cards for 2 mana thing, expressive iteration, you said yes, I said no.
I just think it's like expressive at the time. There was nothing to compete with it.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're going up the beanstalk.
Well, my stance here, and I'll let you go on further than this, but my stance here is no, because, dude, it's the same thing as Dig Through Time, but it is always 2 mana. You're not going as deep for sure, but like, you're getting 2 cards.
You are more often than not getting 2 cards, yes. But that the incentives of how you are now, granted, like expressive iteration is probably the worst variation of this kind of effect, in that it's incentivizing only in exactly what Delver wants to do, which is just play proactive things that, you know, you can just apply. You just cast stuff, you just do stuff. I would love to see variations of these cards that ask something of you other than just do stuff. Do it, and then do the stuff that does more stuff. Like, I would love it if there was actually some amount of thought behind do stuff.
We used to have a term for this in Magic. It's called incentivized for playing poorly. Cursed Scroll is a very good example of this. You're incentivized for having no cards in your hand, right? Like, and that's sort of what I think you're getting at there. The like, you just do whatever you can, and then like that becomes a resource somehow.
I think that in my mind, it's interesting that like everybody's like expressive iteration, way too good. And is that true? Maybe. Did it have any competition at the time that it was legal? Not even close. And now people are like, oh, well, Questing Druid just won Eternal Weekend Europe, and that's a 2 mana draw 3. And I get that there's no selection, but you're guaranteed to get the threat on the other side. And that's also an instant, which means that if you flip over your Delver or your Daze or your Force on your expressive iteration, you're not casting that shit. Whereas with Questing Druid, if you're like, well, I need to find a counterspell, I'll instant speed this thing, and if you find the Force, you can pitch cast it. Like, I think that the fact that there was no pressure whatsoever from any other cards that are even in contention of being relatively at the same power level for a similar effect as expressive iteration meant, again, that, like, of course it was too good. There was nothing else going on, and there was nothing else to keep up with it. So, you know, and I get that Delver was the thing that was abusing it, and Delver is going to be the cause for a lot of the, like, that shell is going to be the cause for a lot of things getting banned. But, like, hey, man, everybody was like, oh, it's so dumb because you can play Mystic Sanctuary and get it back, and then Daze picks up your Mystic Sanctuary. And that's one of those things, again, where I'm like, is Daze then the problem card? Because that's the one that's compressing the format. Expressive wasn't compressing your format. I mean, was Expressive keep making it so that those decks had fuel to keep up? Okay, sure, but is Questing Druid doing that too? Questing Druid won a tournament. Nobody's calling for that card to get the axe. But it's also because Questing Druid isn't the only option. People were like, oh, I'll play Grixis and play Orcus Bowmasters. There's a choice to be made. And I wonder if Expressive Iteration would be in a similar vein. Yeah. I don't know. Is it too good? It might be. But it will at least have some amount of options to be made. Because it's like, okay, I'm going to go full Grixis, and I'm going to play Expressive and Orcus Bowmaster, and then you're a full turn slower. Yeah. Your clock is a lot slower. You're not applying nearly as much pressure as like just the straight, you know, blue-red aggro Delver list. And that's interesting.
I don't hate that idea, because I would like to see the deck slow down a little bit. You know, like I'm sick of having to immediately have an answer or win the game like within a turn or two. You know,
like there's some amount of that already being seen in that there's the Questing Druid Rug version of Delver. Mm-hmm. Then there's the Grixis Orcus Bowmaster version of Delver. Granted, these are the same shells. Play patterns are the same, but like the interaction points on those two slots are different. Like they're critically different. But then there's also the 4-color monstrosity that's playing both Questing Druid and Orcus Bowmaster. And that deck maybe plays out a little bit differently too, because it's way grindier. It's trying to do more stuff at 2 mana. The mana base is way worse, but the power level is higher because you get access to those cards. Like, okay, throw Expressive Iteration into the mix. What happens then?
Make Spell Snare great again.
Does Questing Druid just get cut altogether? Does Orcus Bowmaster just get removed from that list because you want to be cleaner and you're like, I'll play the slight green splash and just play all of these expressive iteration effects? But then if you're playing all of this card draw that's not affecting the board, then are you going to be way slower? It's like when you remove that stuff, you're just like, okay, here's your Delver Precon.
Yeah.
The only cards that are legal for it, the obvious best options, there's your deck. And you don't have to think about anything. It's like back when everybody's like, oh, I missed the time where you could play Bug Delver and Rug Delver and Grixis Delver, and there's all these different flavors of Delver, and it's all the same shell. It's doing the exact same play patterns, but there's enough little spice differences that everybody's like, all right, you want Chinese, you want Japanese, you want Szechuan, right? And it's like, what type of Asian cuisine would you like? And they are meaningfully different, right? Yeah. Like if you go out and have Szechuan versus if you go out and have sushi, you're going to have a very different experience. Now, it's if I say, hey, do you want to go out for Asian cuisine tonight? And you're thinking Szechuan, and I'm thinking sushi, then we're on very different stratospheres, right? Yeah. Very different. And I'm like, if that's satisfying enough for us as a community with one archetype of a deck, then throw more spice in there, man. Maybe I want Thai food.
Yeah, perhaps. It's an interesting metaphor to say the least. But yeah,
delicious and unique cuisine, Zach.
What's that?
Delicious and unique cuisines as a metaphor?
Yeah.
It's the best kind of metaphor.
It is a great metaphor. I'm still in the camp of no way Jose. Now, I do want to bring up a card that I changed my mind on from last year, and that's Gitaxian Probe. And the reason for this, Phil, is because it didn't get banned for any real reason I can tell. Like, it wasn't in a deck that was, like, winning every one of it. Like, it got banned at the same time as Deathright Shaman just for reasons.
Grixis Delver was the best deck in that format, and it was 4 of in that deck. It was also
a 4 of in Grixis Delver? Yes, I don't think it was.
It was 4 Gitaxian Probe, 4 Cabal, 3 to 4 Cabal Therapy with Young Pyromancer. It was also in Storm as
Probe
Cabal Therapy was busted.
Pyromancer, it was like are we in a world where like getting a 1/1 off of 1 Pyromancer for 2 life matters anymore?
It was in every single deck that every combo deck that just wanted to look and see if the coast was clear. You want to know why Gitaxian Probe was banned and why it should never come back?
I brought up the reason that they said, so I'd like to read that before you tell me your reason that it was banned. And so in the last paragraph here, while Gitaxian Probe's impact on the legacy environment has not necessarily reached a boiling point, it is a strong contributor to the success of the most popular decks. Because of the negative influence Gitaxian Probe has on gameplay as a free spell and low-cost information advantage, we prefer to remove it from the format rather than needing to weaken strategies it facilitates in other ways. We've seen Modern end up with healthier without Gitaxian Probe, and it's time we take that step for Legacy. Now, would you say that Legacy got healthier or unhealthier after 2018?
Zach, I just want to point out again, just because we had a disease then and we have a new disease now doesn't mean that we should be fully diseased at all times. Gitaxian Probe was an absolute menace to the form. Every single game that Gitaxian Probe was part of, that game wasn't fun because it removed the information
Not
exchange
for you.
from the game
I had
entirely.
a blast.
Gitaxian Probe sucks, and I just want you to think of let's hypothetically for 1 second, let's just think of one game. We're going to start one game. You lost the die roll, Zach. I'm on the play. I'm that good. I'm on the play. Gitaxian Probe's legal. I go, turn 1, Dragon Rage Channeler, cast Probe. Is that the format you would like to play, Zach? Would you like to continue that game? Do you want to keep going with that game? You want to keep playing it?
I have one question. You're going to get on me for saying Teferi, and you're going to keep saying Gitaxian Probe?
What are you calling it?
Gitaxian Probe.
It's Jin Gitaxis.
Jin Gitaxis.
Jin Gitaxis.
Jin Gitaxis.
It's not a Gus sound, is it?
To get.
It's named after Jin Gitaxis.
No,
the Praetor.
Yeah, Jin Gitaxis.
Isn't it pronounced Gitaxis? Isn't it a hard G?
I have no idea now.
Or a soft G, rather?
I thought.
Comments. So this is the real debate. This is the real. Fuck all these cards. This is the real debate.
Yeah.
Gitaxian
yes or
Probe.
no? Jin Gitaxis or Jin Ditaxis? How do you say it?
You get probe somebody, but it's Jin Gitaxis.
Yeah.
I get here's
probe.
the thing. Okay, I'll happily be wrong on the pronunciation because I'm objectively right on this card should never, ever come off. Ever. This might be the card that sucks the most on this list, and there's a lot of cards that suck.
Okay. Well, how about Hermit Druid? I changed my. No, I said yes, and I said yes last year too.
I think this card. I said no. I mean, granted, it's a 1/1 that has to untap, but I said no because it's just another one of those cards that, for like quality of life purposes, it really just destroys any kind of interesting gameplay if you lose the die roll. Like, okay, turn 1, Lotus Petal, land Lotus Petal, Hermit Druid, go. You either have the removal spell or you are dead. You can even go Cavern of Souls, Lotus Petal, Hermit Druid. Your force is dead. Now you need specifically a removal spell or you're dead. Right? Like, that's just so uninteresting to me.
My stance is this card is no less egregious than Thassa's Oracle.
I agree. I mean, I'm fully on board with banning Thassa's Oracle because it's uninteresting. But like, I don't think Hermit Druid is doing anything to make the format more interesting or more fun, or any of the decks that it would be part of, anything other than absolutely degenerate and not looking to do anything other than kill you immediately. And that just doesn't. Is it too powerful for Legacy? Probably not, because like, bolt it. But like, at the same time, it's like, okay, well, if you don't have the removal spell, the game just auto ends, and that's just so boring.
Yeah. My whole stance here was to make that point about Thassa's Oracle. The next card,
we can agree on Thassa's. If you want to throw Thassa's Oracle onto this list, then we can both say yes, ban it. That's fine.
Our ban episode is later. We can do a ban episode later.
I mean, pour one out for Lab, man, dude. Like, what an era.
Yeah. The next card, I changed my mind to yes, unban this card. You already had it as an unban. Imperial Seal.
Yeah, Imperial Seal is a sorcery, which I think is very different than something like Vampiric Tutor.
Yeah.
Because Vampiric Tutor end stepping for whatever you need after your opponent's turn. But Imperial Seal at a sorcery, I get that like you can get any card, so it's obviously an upgrade from Personal Tutor, which is the only type of tutor of this kind of, adjacent tutor like this that puts it on top of your library that sees any play, and it's just because you don't have 8 copies of Doomsday. But the idea that Imperial Seal has the upgrade of like, you can play it off your Dark Ritual mana, and that's something. But like, Personal Tutor sucks. Every Doomsday player that plays Personal Tutor will tell you how that's the worst card in the deck, and if they didn't have to play it, they wouldn't. And I think that like the cost of going down a card plus the information that your opponent has, like, okay, if I go if you don't know what I'm on, and I'm like, okay, well, yeah, I need to find the Doomsday, and I go turn 1 Imperial Seal Doomsday. That informs a bunch of things. Yeah. Okay, maybe I'm not cantripping. Maybe I'm holding, or I'm not playing a threat. Maybe I'm holding up interaction. Okay, my cantrip is now, I know how to find interaction. Maybe there's other things to be said if like Imperial Seal becomes a meaningful part of the format because of all these mono black decks or whatever. Like, maybe you play more stuff that interacts with the top of the deck. Like, if you go turn 1 Imperial Seal, and we've seen that Portent has showed up not just in my decks, but actually in winning deck lists. Like, It was a 2-of in that Delver list that won Europe. It's like, Imperial Seal, go. Okay, Portent you, right? Like, oh, there's actually a huge cost there. Not only did you go down a card, but now you're not even getting it, right? Yeah. And then there's counterplay to be had. Like, I think Imperial Seal would be interesting to come off. Is it too good? Maybe, but I really doubt it, because going down a card is just so devastating in the world we live in now.
I don't think it does anything interesting to the format, but I also think like, hey, they just reprinted this card. Like, sure, why not?
Yeah, I think that like if Imperial Seal, I think at a sorcery speed, if anything, I think it's probably underpowered by the way that we play today. I think it would be interesting. It would open up some amount of deck building space that I think is kind of interesting. And there's counterplay to it, obviously, because it's a sorcery. You go down a card, which is, the most punishing thing you can do. And I think it would be interesting to come off. And now that they've reprinted it, the financial barrier that we don't care about isn't even, all that much of a hurdle.
Well, speaking of cards they should reprint into Oblivion, both of us have yes on unbanning Library of Alexandria.
Yeah, reserve list, so they can't actually do that until they do away with that stuff. But
come on, cowards.
I think the only thing that Library of Alexandria, like when we talked about it last time, Lorien Revealed didn't exist. And nowadays, your colorless mana source can fetch you a colored source, which is, something that's interesting.
Now we can play Library of Alexandria with no consequences.
I get that, like, Library of Alexandria, like, if you're on the draw and you have access to 4 library, and then it's like, okay, maybe you're on library plus Lorien Revealed, and, like, that's maybe too good. But, like, again, if you were just... If Urza Saga was printed instead of Library of Alexandria, and Library of Alexandria was printed in Modern Horizons 2, and we looked back and we go, can you believe Urza Saga existed? That card was absolutely insane. And like Library of Alexandria now,
you're like, draw the card, whatever.
The debate would not be close.
Yeah, no,
Urza Saga is so far and away, in my mind, infinitely more powerful than Library of Alexandria, because Library of Alexandria is good in only and exactly the circumstance of I am on the draw and I have it in my opening hand.
Yeah. Maybe you are on the play and it's in your opening hand, because at least then you get to your draw step and then you draw a card.
But then you're playing off curve. That's a consequence.
It's true, but it's not bad per se. I'm just saying that, it's not as good as being on the draw, but like, do you want to be the deck that has to be on the draw? Screw playing off curve. If you're drawing an extra card every turn, who cares?
But it's a colorless mana source that, like, the only thing that you can do with colorless mana in this format is the land cyclers, as far as I'm aware, beyond, like, play a grindstone or whatever.
You could put Prophetic Prism into play, bro.
Dude, that's on turn 2, though. So,
Library, is that not good enough?
That's not. I mean, you just get dazed, right? That was what I was alluding to before. Daze is your problem.
Okay,
but listen. So Library of Alexandria, like, let's say you were on the play as the Library of Alexandria deck. If you go Library of Alexandria, your opponent can be like, okay, wasteland it, right?
Of course.
The same way that if you went Urza Saga on turn 1, I probably got to wasteland that if I can't deal with the constructs. But like, there is no doubt in my mind that in a pound for pound matchup between Library of Alexandria and Urza Saga is leagues more powerful.
I'd be interested in seeing what the format looked like if you could build like a 4 of Library of Alexandria deck with the land cyclers. I think I would be interested in what that format would look like, because it would feel very old school to me, and maybe that's just because it's one of the better cards in old school. But I think it'd be interesting to see if you could grind it out with Library of Alexandria if you just had access to enough resources.
Like, you looking at Vintage as just like the only, I get that Library of Alexandria is restricted in Vintage, but like, if you just look at that the space of where that play pattern is of colorless mana source plus Florian revealed, you have to play wastelands. You have to play your strips. Nobody reaches for Library of Alexandria. It is just not existent at all. Yeah. And I get that it's a 1 of, and if you don't draw it in your opener, it's bad. And it may be different if it's a 4 of. But like, that has never been experimented with in a meaningful format that, like, in our modern lifetimes. And it is laughably underpowered by comparison to Urza Saga.
Do you know, Phil, that there was a point in time where Maze of Ith was restricted?
I do remember that, because I played, and I get it, because I've now played enough of the older locked formats, where you're like, I can't believe Maze is a card. And again, that's another one of those cards where
we rant now. They used to rant about how insane it was that this card that you spent no mana on could stop a creature for the whole game.
And you want to know why?
And because at the time and stop my next creature.
Because at the time, your creatures didn't have static effects that punished your opponent for taking game actions, didn't ATB to draw some amount of value. Like, it was an entirely different world. Your creatures, the thing that you were paying for was power and toughness.
Yep.
And that card turned off power and toughness. Where, like, Maze of Ith, maybe you see it played in lands, as a 2 of or something.
Can you imagine, if Maze of Ith was a card that people played and were like, and Dragon Rage Chandler just existed during that era? They'd be like, I don't care.
You want to know where Maze of Ith got it right, though? And I get that they don't print lands anymore that don't make mana, but like, the fact that, okay, it's a land, but the cost of it not producing mana was actually the interesting trade-off that you had to make. And it's like, I think now that we're on the Urza Saga kick of like it being actually the most busted land, like, think about all of the busted lands that exist in the game. You have Bazaar, you have Mishra's Workshop, you have
Seafarer's Quay.
I guess you could
Adventures Guildhouse.
You have Guildhouse. You could argue Strip Mine, but you know what's like? It's like you have Bazaar, Mishra's Workshop, Tolarian Academy, and fucking Urza Saga.
Yeah, I mean,
that's it. That's
moving
my argument.
on.
Is a land banned? Is it Urza Saga? No, then it doesn't need to be banned.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. All right, moving on. Luris, the Dream Den. I said, sure, take it off the ban list. I don't care.
Companion's too broken.
But this was banned when Companion didn't cost 3 mana. Am I right?
It was banned, even when it had 3 mana. It was banned in Vintage, my guy.
I know. Well, it's banned in Vintage, which is wild. But it was banned in Vintage during when it didn't cost 3 mana, and then they unbanned it in Vintage because they were like, okay, we fixed this rule, and now we don't have to like go through the looking glass on what Vintage is again. You know, Vintage is the place where every non-dexterity card is unbanned.
Here's the threshold that I would put it at. Lurrus of the Dream Den without companion. You have to play it in your deck. You have to run it in some number. Is it powerful enough for Legacy as it stands?
I think we talked about that last year because this was one I didn't change my mind on. But I think now, like with 3 mana companion, like I don't care. Like someone's just gonna be like, okay, I paid 3 mana and put this into my hand, and like a Delver deck's gonna be like, cool. Well, you're dead.
You want to know how insanely powerful Luris was? In that you don't ever have to draw it until you want to. One of the top decks in that meta, obviously it was all Delver because, you know, Luris is only incentivizing the stuff that Delver is already the best at doing. You want to know what people did? What top decks did? They played Meddling Mage to name Lurrus. That's how powerful it was. You played the card just to name the card that was free so they couldn't play it. Lurrus of the Dream Den's effect is individually unique. There is no other card that does what it does. It is like the card of Luris, even without companion, just the effect of pulling any CMC permanent of 2 or less from your yard every turn does not exist as a parallel anywhere. The closest thing is Emery. That's it.
Yeah.
That's the closest thing is Emery. And Emery is Library of Alexandria on a stick.
Yeah. All right. Well, you know, like I said, I'm not hard about that card in particular. I just I just didn't change my mind from last year.
You want to know what I get to do if I have access to Luris? I can still play all of the busted cards that aren't creatures, that aren't permanents, right? I'm going to play up the beanstalk Luris. And you want to know what I'm going to put in my deck? No fucking win conditions, because I don't have to. I can do everything to stop everything that you're doing. And then when you're done, when you're ready to tap out, then I'll reach into my sideboard.
Yeah.
It's too good.
All right. The next card we both agreed on, and we agreed on last year. When will they unban mana drains?
Zach, after all of the hostility that we have had in this cast, which has pretty much only specifically been derived from me, targeted and only specifically at you, which I now, you know, post-mortem apologize for, but I'm happy that we can agree on mana drain.
Mana drain. I mean, you know, if nations can come together on mana drain, I feel like...
Dude, the 2 arms meme, man. You, me, mana drain.
Yeah, exactly. There's not much more to say. Like, what would change? The only difference between now and last year is that people would play the One Ring off of this card. It just incentivizes you to actually play this card and maybe give it a home.
Yeah, I just think that a 2 mana counterspell is just so like you. I get that even there's like with the conditional upside of like maybe you make colorless mana after the fact, but that would also presume that you're playing. Like, let's say you were playing actual factual counterspell in your One Ring deck, and like the fact that that's not even a remote consideration, even in the slightest. If anything, the One Ring only incentivizes you to play more free counter magic, so you'd be on Force of Will and Force of Negation before you even touched a spell that costs mana.
Yeah,
like that's the format is so fast that it's only incentivizing free counter magic because you can't afford to Rashad and port yourself by holding up counter magic that may not line up. We've had that conversation with like Spell Snare and stuff. Like the cost is just too steep because the threats end the game way too fast.
Yeah.
You can't afford to not be using your mana, particularly if it means that there's a card that is otherwise effectively dead in your hand. So the idea that you would do that for 2 mana, it doesn't have cycling. It doesn't have another alternative other than pitch casting it to the better counterspell.
Yeah.
So if counterspell isn't even in, you know, counterspell is like, okay, maybe it's fine in Modern, but like it is not remotely close to playable in Legacy anymore. And mana drain, I don't like. Even if mana drain came off, I think it would have the same outcome that what's the storm card that came off that I can't even remember?
Mind's Desire, which is funny because that was a card. Let me just look, because that was a card I think we agreed on last year that we didn't care about. Like I think we said maybe. Like we were like, yeah, whatever. Maybe.
Mind's Desire ran into the unfortunate fact that they printed Beseech the Mirror, which is the most busted thing they've ever printed for Storm.
Yeah, we both said maybe about Mind's Desire last year.
Yeah, I think Mana Drain would have a similar thing where the initial dopamine hit of getting to try this card that you haven't gotten to play for a long time would be really exciting.
Yeah.
And then the more and more people played with it, the more and more they'd be like, oh, maybe I should cut this for this thing. And then eventually you'd get down to 0 copies. The way that Storm was like, oh, I'm going to play My Desire.
It's like My Desire. It doesn't matter. It could be brought off the ban list, and no one would care too much. But you'd have a resurgence of people trying it. Bryant Cook would try it in Storm. For the memes.
Mana Drain? Like. No. Tony Scapone would try it in PO.
Yeah, there you go. All right. So here's a list of cards that didn't change for us at all. These were the same as last year. Mind Twist, I said sure. You said no, because who needs that nonsense in Magic? And I kind of agree with you, but at the same time, I just don't care. But after losing to a mono black Pox deck last week, you know what? I kind of agree with you now.
You have Hymn to Turok, which is arguably better than Mind Twist.
Yeah,
I get
exactly.
that. Like, if Mind Twist is ever better than Hymn to Turok, then it's just the game is shitty, right? Like, if at any point it's
Old School's
the degree
fun.
of this being better than Hymn to Turok, that game isn't fun for anybody, and I just don't see a reason to like incentivize anybody to try and have that kind of gameplay.
Sure. The next one is Mystical Tutor. You said yes. I said no.
Mystical Tutor, I could definitely see myself being very wrong on. I imagine that the cost of going down a card is really steep, and I know that the people who have played Personal Tutor, again, when we were talking about Imperial Seal, the difference of this being an instant, even though it's for instants and sorceries as opposed to any card, it being an instant might mean that it's too good. It's closer to Vampiric Tutor than it is to Imperial Seal.
I mean, for the deck that won it, it is better than Vampiric Tutor.
Right, but the only deck that would want that currently at the moment is
Doomsday.
Exactly and only Doomsday. Now, could this open up some maybe other space for other combo decks? Like, would Mystical Tutor give High Tide a bump? Or like, are there decks that we don't even know because like Mystical Tutor would help them give the consistency that they need to actually see play? Like, going down a card is a very significant cost. And I could definitely, like the other ones, I'm feeling fairly confident on. Mystical Tutor, I could easily see myself being wrong, but it's the one that I would want to give the experiment. I'd be willing to take the 6 months of the experiment of maybe but also maybe being fine.
One card that I have remained stalwart on, that I will not change my mind on, that we have a Patreon, shout out to our Patreons right now, our patrons, shout out to them, but we have a whole Patreon tier to this card. Unbanned Necropotent, you cowards.
Remember when we were just talking about how Doomsday doesn't have Doomsday's copies 5 through 8?
Yeah. But right. You can't even get this with Personal Tutor, dude.
Right. You know what you would hey, if Necropotent is unbanned, I sure do need to open up some slots in my deck for this Necropotent I got now.
Yep.
Maybe.
No, it's too good. Okay.
Dude, for what it's worth, Galvanic Relay does a really, really good Necropotence.
It does. It does. It basically, like, I lost to that last. That was the other deck that I lost to last week. Was Storm playing Galvanic Relay, and I was like, well, this is terrible.
Yeah, but you want to know what's way better than Galvanic Relay?
Turn 1 Dark Ritual.
A Galvanic Relay that you can cast off of Dark Ritual that then also fuels your Beseech the Mirror.
Yep. Yeah. Oh man, that's and in a pinch you could use it. You could get rid of it with Beseech the Mirror, so you can start drawing cards again. If you were in that bad of a shape. All right. The next one is Oath of Druids, which I said yes, you said no. Why no?
Yeah. I mean, have you played against Oath of Druids before?
I have, yes. Yeah, I played against when it first came out. I played against it. People were like, "Haha, 2 mana, Sarah's Avatar. I got you."
So I want to talk about what we talked about with Hermit Druid. I'm going to go... you lost the die roll again in this example. Sorry, bud. You got to win some die rolls at some point. You aren't a Force of Will deck, okay? And if you're not a Force of Will deck, that probably implies that you're one of two things, right? You're a Dark Ritual combo, or you're a creature deck. I'm on the play. I'm going to go... what's the land that gives you a creature? Orchard?
Forbidden Orchard.
I'm going to go for Lotus Petal, Forbidden Orchard, play Oath of Druids, you're dead. If I don't have the Forbidden Orchard, I'm going to go land, Lotus Petal, Oath of Druids, and you can't cast creatures ever.
Make Disenchant great again.
We need to get Disenchants back in our format.
4 of in every deck. I'm just like not. I want to see that in action. If it's terrible, get rid of it in a month. I don't care. The card costs like $3 now. They've reprinted it in like a Commander product, so it's not even like a situation where like everyone's gonna be like, oh no, they reprinted Oath of Druids and it's $500 a pop. All right. Sensei's Divining Top, you say yes, I say no. Why? Why, Phil? Why do you need this card?
I said yes for the brand.
Yeah, you can't not say no.
Yeah.
Just so that you could play. Just so you could play Urza Saga too. I get it, man. You want to be an Urza Saga gamer just like the rest of us, bro.
I mean, yeah, no. Since I stopped, I said yes, but no, you can't. Like, all the 1 mana artifacts will forever have to be looked at through the lens of the actual busted card. So
yeah.
This would also be a no for me if I was anybody other than who I am.
So why not Skullclamp then?
So you said yes to Skullclamp.
I said yes to Skullclamp. I'm in.
And
do it.
I saw you say yes to Astrolabe. I saw you say yes to Hermit Druid. I saw you say yes to Oath of Druid.
I opened it up.
And then all this time I was like, you said yes to Jataxian Probe.
I'm saying yes. So this is a perfect time for me to chime in. The reason why I said yes to all these cards is because if all these cards are unbanned together, I think the format balances itself out a little bit.
Into
whatever this format is. I don't know.
Into a wild west of degeneracy that doesn't last beyond turn 2. Now, when I got to Skull, I thought like for the first ones, I was like, man, I don't know where your head's at, but I'm real curious. And then once I got to Skullclamp, I was like, now he's trolling me.
No, Skullclamp would be specifically good in a X1 deck, right? Well, right now everyone's saying X1 decks can't even exist because of Bowmaster. So let's like put that to the test.
Dude, you know the two major significant players in the format? Urza Saga and Orcish Bowmasters.
Yeah.
And you know what's good with both of those cards?
Skullclamp?
We sure do need to make our Bowmaster and our Urza Saga better. We just need those decks to have free Ancestral recalls. We sure do need that.
No, you're not wrong. You're not wrong.
Hey, you know what? You know what we should do? When I don't need Lifelink off of my Shadow Spear, you know what I'm going to get? I'm going to get this thing that Pot of Greed's me if you deal with my threat that's killing you. That's what I'm going to do.
Greed.
And then if you deal with that threat after I've drawn 2 cards, I'll equip it to my other one, and then you have to deal with that one, and then I'll draw 2 more cards. Yeah. Come on, man. Come on.
I'm into it.
Skullclamp
I think it's great.
ain't reasonable. Skullclamp ain't right.
Okay. On to Survival of the Fittest. We both said that this can come off. We did not change our minds from last year. We agreed last year that this could come off as well.
Yeah, I think it's another one of those, like, it's a problem of its time.
Yeah.
In that, like, at the time at the era where it was banned, you had time to like put a Vengevine in the graveyard every turn.
I'm even more on the unbannedness in a world where like the 2 mana like enchantment that is green and 1 is way more degenerate than this. Up the Beanstalk is way more degenerate than this card.
Yeah, Survival of the Fittest. Now, is it incentivizing interesting gameplay? I mean, it could. Might. I mean, it could. I think the Survival of the Fittest decks of old would not look like anything like the Survival of the Survival of the Fittest decks now, because the creatures that you have access to are unbelievably more powerful. So, I mean, is a recurable Tutor too good for the format? Maybe. Like, the only home that I think this goes in, immediately is like maybe there's some tension with the Green Sun Zenith decks, or like, maybe the Cradle Control decks like cut their,
we get like a weird full English breakfast variant in Legacy.
Like maybe they get rid of their Fiend Artisans to play Survival of the Fittest instead. Like maybe there's that upgrade, and maybe that they don't need that, and it isn't really doing what we would want. But like, is it too powerful? I don't think so. Probably not. Like, would it oppress the format? No way.
So the only card on here that I included that we both said no on was a card that I changed my mind from last year, and that's Time Vault. I think Time Vault should remain banned, just because like that's nonsense.
Yeah.
What was I drinking last year that I thought that would be okay?
I love that you were like, you know what? I'm gonna open my 4 Time Vault deck with my Urza Sagas that'll fetch me my keys uncounterable.
I think that's what it was, Phil. Is that like I had only been really messing around with Urza Sagas for like maybe like 3 months at the time, and I wasn't fully on the boat of like this card is just bonkers.
You know what it is? It's just a faster, cleaner, more resilient painter.
Yeah. Well, on top of that, Phil, Time Vault in a world where people are playing Beseech the Mirror, Time Vault is like literally just the other card you need to win.
Yeah, I mean, I'm saying that like the closest thing that you have of like the 2 mana artifact plus 1 mana artifact win the game is Painter, but that's a 6 mana line or a total of 6 mana. Even though Urza Saga does discount it and tutor you, Urza Saga would also discount and tutor you here, but it's instead with Urza Saga a 3 mana line, without Urza Saga a 4 mana line, and that is too strong because obviously
then apparently we had another one that one of the two of us changed our minds on.
I did,
or I just didn't realize what was going on. Windfall. We both said no, and I think that's just like obviously. But maybe it was because we were on the same page with what's it called? Mind's Desire, and we were just like, who cares?
Yeah, I don't know where it was, but
Windfall for you was a medium minus. So you had like a maybe minus. So you had like I don't know if it should be. You were like could be, could not be.
Yeah, I think that like my headspace is like you have like LED Echo, and the thing about Windfall is that again, I don't think it would actually create any interesting deck building choices. The only thing Windfall is doing is I want to affinity my hand onto the board and cast Windfall.
Yeah.
So you don't actually gain anything from the recycling of cards, and I just get a full new grip. And there is no other more powerful incentive other than only exactly that.
Yeah.
And that is not interesting. It's not fun.
Rewarded
and it's
for
not
playing
something that I think
Magic
anybody
poorly,
needs to.
They call that.
So like it's similar like when Days Undoing first came out, people were experimenting with like affinity listed and Days Undoing to like offset the same way that you would with like Time Twister. But the difference of you get to draw like if your opponent has more cards than you and you get to offset that, it's different than we both equivalently draw 7. And I think that it's just not going to like, is it too powerful? Maybe not, but I don't think it's in the mind twist category for me of just like, who wants that? Why?
Wrenn 6, I have as a yes, unban this card. You have it as a no. Last year I had it as like sort of the similar thing to you is like a maybe. I had a maybe plus, which we're not doing we're not doing maybes. Like pick a side. So I had this as a maybe plus. And I think that like again in the context of all the other cards, like what was one of the reasons why they banned Wrenn 6? Was it because it ruined all the the X1 synergies in the format? Well, we already have a card that does that, and everyone seems to be fine with it. So I say, if you are worried about 2 mana cards that stop people from playing X1s, let's talk about Orcish Bowmaster then.
Yeah, I think I agree with that idea. I think that like the idea I said no to pulling Wrenn 6 back up, but I pulled it up for a different reason than it locks out the X1s. I agree that it does, and I think that's much more of an indictment of Bowmasters than it is a slight against Wrenn 6, even though Wrenn 6 came first. My take on Wrenn 6 was that having a much cheaper Crucible lock that is also a win condition on top of that after the fact. Like if the Crucible lock didn't plus on Wrenn 6, but the fact that you're building towards your ultimate while also being a Crucible lock, that's where I go, is it all that compelling or interesting? Like, I feel like Wasteland is.
You think if they switched the
very
two of them,
good,
it would have been different?
If you had what?
If it was +1 to do a pointed damage to a creature, planeswalker, or player, right, to any target, and then the -2 was to get a land back from your yard, do you think that would have been a card that would have been, better for the format, I should say?
No, it's still degenerate just because it's it's another one of those. It's a 2 mana hard to interact with permanent that locks you out, but this one it locks out in multiple ways. Like Bowmaster is probably getting the nod in that, like, you know, there's the fail safe of like you can still cast your cantrip, it's just going to cost you, you know, your entire life total.
Yeah.
Whereas like Wrenn 6 is just like, okay, I can never actually leave a non-basic land exposed. And you know, is it good? Like, should there be more tension against the decks that have bad mana bases? Like, maybe that's more interesting than, like, you know, all the Blood Moon effects, in that, like, you're incentivizing Ancient Tomb decks instead of, you know, Gruul decks or decks that have access to red and green. But, like, it's never actually honest red and green. And again, when you were talking about how Oko, you know, is what pushed Astrolabe over the top, do you remember, like, the most powerful versions of the Wrenn and 6 decks? It was a 2 basic island, 2 basic swamp. It was the deck played 2 basic island, 2 basic swamp.
Delver at the time,
and it played no forest. Like, the deck could only cast Wrenn and 6 off of Astrolabe.
Yeah.
So, like, if that's a nod to how powerful Astrolabe is, like, you know, but then once Wrenn and 6 was, you know, again, Wrenn and 6 was that 2 mana thing that Bowmasters now is currently occupying, where we went from Wrenn and 6 and then we went to Expressive Iteration and now we're at Bowmaster, maybe Questing Druid because of that, you know, but like, could Wrenn and 6 come off? I think Wrenn and 6 by itself, probably not. Could it come off if Expressive came off and Deathright Shaman came off and all these other cards came off? Yeah, maybe then we're at a power level where it's reasonable enough. But like, I don't think giving your best deck in the format that's been the best deck forever access to a Crucible lock to just, you know, I don't. That's my defense.
Fair enough.
Do we need to subsidize the best deck further?
All right, Yawgmoth's Bargain. We both said sure.
Hold on. I actually want to take that back. I said, do we want to subsidize the best deck? What do you think that if Wrenn and 6 came off, that there would be any discussion between that versus Questing Druid or Bowmaster?
No. I think maybe there would be. Maybe you would play all of them. But I think that would be the discussion. Do I play all of these or do I play Wrenn and 6?
Now, if Expressive Iteration and Wrenn and 6 came off, what do you think? Do you think you would just be on the exact same way?
I think, yeah, you'd just play both of them.
So what are you cutting in those instances?
You're probably going more mid-range. You're probably like playing like a soup deck instead of like a Delver deck.
Okay, so you're saying that it would move Delver closer to 4-color variants.
Yeah, you're going more mid-range. You're removing the Dragon Rage Chandler and the Delver, and you're playing those 2 cards instead.
How do you think about Wrenn and 6 versus something like Up the Beanstalk? Would you play both?
I don't think you can play both in the same deck. I don't think you should, at least. But yeah, I think that is the choice you have to make. There is like, do you want to be the Wasteland deck, or do you want to be the 4-color soup deck, 5-color soup deck?
I mean, I think this is actually, so Wrenn and 6 is the one that I want to hear from most now in the comments on this, because like I came in thinking that there's no way, but you know, talking about how like the other stuff is powerful, like I think one of the most interesting parts about unbanned list discussion is the pressures that are applied by that context between what are the choices that you actually make and actually diving a little bit deeper into like what do those decks look like? Because if you're like, okay, maybe Questing Druid and Wrenn and 6 because they're in color, but then you actually have to commit to green. You can't just play like the one-off trop, and you know it's fine to cast the creature when you have access to it, but otherwise you're just doing it for the value. But then like, okay, Wrenn and 6, and if you're playing Wrenn and 6 and Expressive and you're upping your curve, like Expressive Iteration is going to punish you for upping your curve because then you're going to have more, like you're not going to convert 2 cards in those instances. So maybe that's interesting. Like, okay, you know, is Wrenn and 6 Wasteland lock? Does that incentivize, you know, the Delver decks to slow down to keep up, which means that you then have more time to fetch basics to like develop better because you have actually time to develop now, so you don't have to like walk yourself into Wasteland just in order to keep up with the fact that they have 8 1-mana 3-power flyers. There's actually some interesting discussion there. I am not as hard and fast no on Wrenn and 6 as I was coming into the episode.
All right. Well, it's good because you've changed my mind a few times on some of these cards, and I'm glad I was able to finally do it for you on a card that honestly I think is probably one of the hardest cards to defend in truth.
Yeah, I mean has fallen entirely out in Modern,
Mhm.
but the only difference between Legacy and Modern in terms of where Wrenn and 6 is, because for the most part we're all playing the same threats. But I mean, I get the incentives in some of the matchups, like Primeval Titan is not a deck in Legacy.
Sure.
Unless you consider Cloudpost a Legacy.
It's not even a primal Titan deck,
which I don't necessarily consider. It is a primetime deck, but
it has prime time in it.
Yeah, it's not primetime in the same way.
Yeah.
But Wrenn and 6 does not have access to Wasteland in Modern, but if it did, I'm sure it would be everywhere. Yeah. And the domain, the 4 and 5 color, control less with Leyline Binding would just cease to exist. But I don't know. Maybe you're just playing Wrenn and 6 as a way to offset the fact that again, the best way to combat a card is a copy of the card, right? Yep. If you're going to Wasteland lock me, I'll just pick up my lands again with my own Wrenn and 6.
All right, so we've got 2 cards left, and I don't think we should spend too much time on them. But I think if we're going to spend time on one of the 2 of them, Yawgmoth's Bargain. It's interesting that we both said yes on this, and we both said yes last year. And I'm not 100% sold on my yes, but I think like if Beseech the Mirror exists, this card is no better than Beseech the Mirror at the end of the day.
I think the way that we compared this was that if Grizzlebrand exists, there's no way that
exactly
because Grizzlebrand is a lot easier to put into play than
it's funny because I don't even give a shit about Grizzlebrand anymore.
Yeah, you're effectively dead regardless either way, right? Yeah. Like it was one of those things where it's like if the Grizzlebrand hit play, it's like, well, now you have the argument of like, oh, Grizzlebrand or Atraxa. It doesn't matter, you're dead either way. Yeah. Like it's you put the fatty into play, you're dead. Like who cares what the effect is? You're dead. Like okay, yeah, they maybe play Atraxa to get around Bowmaster, but you're dead.
It's wild to think about the context of our decisions last year. When now, like, I said that like they'll never make something better than Grizzlebrand. How could they? And then they were like, well, what if it pitches to Force of Will?
Mm-hmm. What if it pitches to everything? Yeah,
to everything, indeed. All right, and then the last one was one where we disagreed on again. It's Zirda the Dawnbreaker, Dawnwaker. And I just don't. It's a card I just don't think it matters if it's banned or unbanned. Like if that becomes a deck that people play, fine, I don't care.
You know what it is? I said no for the same purposes that I said no for like all of the stuff that it's just not doing anything.
It isn't doing anything interesting. You're right.
It's doing nothing interesting, and it's doing nothing that's beneficial for the format. If anything, it's just giving like the Mystic Forge solitaire jerk off decks like a commander that makes it so that their combo is a lot easier because they have a combo piece at the start of the game at the ready. Like there's no other deck that the Zirda would see play in other than only in exactly that type of goldfish. And fuck the goldfish decks, man.
No, I and you know what? I looked back to see what what my thoughts were in 2023, and it was a yes plus, which means it was like yes with caveats, and the caveat was probably like it can't be a companion or something like that. Like so, this is a card like that. I'm kind of like whatever, fine. Like I wouldn't go to bat for this card if they were
for what it's worth, blanket across all of the banned companions. If they just removed companion and they're just reasonable playable cards with powerful effects,
fine.
I would test Luris without companion.
Yeah, for sure.
If I had to draw Luris, like I would test that card out. Yeah. Like I'd be interested in playing with that card. But the fact that you just never have to waste your draw step on it, it's the exact opposite on the other side of the power spectrum of like why I'm maybe interested in trying out Mystical Tutor and Imperial Seal. Sure. Like the cost of drawing the card and then also going down a card to use it is on the far side of the spectrum compared to, oh, here's a powerful combo effect that I just have access and I never have to waste a draw step on it. It's not going down a card, it's going up a card for free plus having the thing. And it's like, that's too good. Imagine if Mystical Tutor was in your command zone and you're like, I'm just going to pay 3, I'll get a Mystical Tutor. And then I'll tutor for whatever I want.
That'd be insane. All right, well, that's our list of cards that should be unbanned in the year of our Lord Urza, 2024. If you have opinions, if you think other cards should be unbanned, I certainly want to hear about them, especially if you have long diatribes to write into the comments. I read those during work. I often will respond to them. If you like this episode and like episodes like them, Hey, we would love to have you as a patron at Eternal Durdles Patreon, patreon.com/Eternal Durdles. And that does it for us this week. We'll see you next week with something new. Thanks, everybody, for watching. For the gift that keeps on giving all year round, join our Patreon at patreon.com/EternalDurdles. And hey, check out this playlist we got up here with all of our interviews over the last couple of years. Some great people from the Legacy community, some really great guests.